Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 18 of season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man. This episode is entitled Damage and is dedicated to the late and sorely missed Dwayne McDuffie. If you're not familiar with this fella, he's a comic book writer who did stuff for DC, Marvel, did his own original stuff for many years, created a lot of really good comics, and was really, you could honestly make a case for the guy being the most well-known black creator in comics. Now, the reason I bring this up is simply because Dwayne McDuffie did, back in the 90s, and honestly throughout his entire career, an awful lot to make comics in terms of race reflect the modern reality in which we live. I don't want to use the word diversity because I personally think that's just a very vague word that, well, okay, let's just leave it at that. I don't want to get into politics here. But anyway, Dwayne did a lot of work at DC and Marvel. He is one of the folks who helped bring the Milestone characters into existence, the most prominent which is, of course, the character Static, who ultimately ended up getting his own show, Static Shock, much loved by fans out there. And McDuffie was also a writer on Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and he's also a fellow who, pardon me, also took the character Black Panther, the genuinely first black superhero, and really retooled him for the modern age. And his take on Black Panther, his writing of that series, really paved the way for Panther to enjoy the popularity among fans and the prominence in the Marvel universe that he enjoys today. So again, not to get into a whole lot of politics here, but modern comics in many ways owe an awful lot to the work, often thankless work, that Dwayne McDuffie did. And I, as a fan, am very pleased to see this episode dedicated to his memory. And if I remember correctly, the reason is this episode was chosen is because he was the creator of Damage Control. So, with that said, let's get into this. Now, Damage Control is one of those ideas that a decent number of creators at Marvel seem to be very fond of. Every once in a while, they'll pop up, as background characters or have a small role. But Damage Control actually had its own series for a good number of years at Marvel. I think it lasted something like 70 issues or in that neighborhood. And they've just sort of enjoyed a sort of quiet popularity among creators and fans ever since then. And, it's not hard to understand why. It's a somewhat quirky idea, admittedly, but it's one that, it's a quirky idea that makes perfect sense within the reality of the Marvel Universe. It makes sense that there really would be a company like Damage Control that, puts New York back together in lickety-split time after the superheroes and villains trash it seemingly every week. So, and if there's a whole big cast of characters associated with Damage Control, and I can honestly say I own exactly one Damage Control comic that I don't think I've read since I was in junior high school. So, beyond my vague knowledge of them, I really can't offer you too much insight on this one. So, really, I don't have very much to say in terms of how accurate Damage Control was to the comics. I really don't know them that very well. So let's talk about what I do understand this episode. Let's start by talking about the villains of this episode, who are the Wrecking Crew. Now, in the comics, the Wrecking Crew are second only to the Circus of Crime in terms of supervillain team punching bags. You can bet if some new team of superheroes debuts in the Marvel Universe, it is only a matter of time before they beat down either the Circus of Crime or the Wrecking Crew. I know Generation X, they got to beat down the Circus of Crime. The Runaways, they took down the Wrecking Crew. And the thing that surprised me about this incarnation of the Wrecking Crew is they have a surprisingly smart plan. With the exception of Thunderball, who is actually, if I remember correctly, he's actually has a guy who has a PhD, but this is rarely mentioned. The Wrecking Crew are really just presented as Spidey thought they were. They're generally presented as just being dumb muscle who, rob banks or are out there doing strong arm work for somebody else. Them coming up with this surprisingly elaborate and equally surprisingly effective plan, that's really not within their MO of the comics, but I'm okay with that. By making these guys more competent, it actually ratchets them up and makes them a much more formidable and thus much more worthy threat for the Amazing Friends to face down. And I won't lie, I was a little disappointed that the team did not introduce themselves as the Amazing Friends. Yes, I know they're never going to refer to themselves as that, but there's some small part of me that still hopes anyway. Now, as for the characters of the Wrecking Crew themselves, I don't really have a whole lot to say. They've never been, at least in any of the comics that I've seen them, portrayed as being particularly deep or interesting characters. They're really just there for the superheroes to wail on. We do have, of course, some very nice voice talent working here. We have Cam Clark, was the voice of Pile Driver, as well as Captain Ultra. Cam Clark, of course, another very venerable voice actor to show up on this show. Folks of my generation will probably know him as Max Sterling and Jack Archer on the much-loved show from the 80s, Robotech. He was the original voice of Kaneda in the very first English dub of the classic anime film Akira. Excuse me. But he is probably best known for folks of my age as the voice of Leonardo, the leader of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. He's also, younger fans will probably know him as the voice of, I believe it is Liquid Snake in the Metal Gear games. Sorry, the only Metal Gear game that I've ever played is the original Metal Gear from the 80s, so I really don't know very much about Metal Gear. Also, great voice actor, we have John DiMaggio as the voice of the Wrecker. He is, of course, best known as Bender on Futurama, but he's got just an absolutely dizzying list of voice acting credits. My personal favorite role, aside from Futurama, of his is him playing both the characters of Waka and Kimari in the game Final Fantasy X, one of my all-time favorite video games. I love Final Fantasy X. There are no words for how much I love Final Fantasy X. But anyway, so let's continue on here. We got some. Sorry, I'm just looking down at my notes, trying to keep my my thoughts on track here. We get some more nice references to movies here. The whole "Hey, I'm walking here," of course, a reference to the much-loved, very classic film Midnight Cowboy. This is one of the things that I do sort of like about Ultimate Spider-Man is there are these references there for the older fans, for the parents in the audience, that they will get that are just going to go completely over the top of the heads of the kids out there watching it. And yeah, Midnight Cowboy is it's not a happy movie. Well, let's just say that. Great movie, but not exactly a happy ending there. And of course, I really enjoyed hearing the insult "laser brain" get thrown out there from Spidey to Nova. This is, of course, an insult that Princess Leia dishes out towards Han Solo in The Empire Strikes Back. The Ultimate Spider-Man writers once again showing their love for Star Wars. And this is, of course, given Peter's rather geeky tendencies, perfectly in keeping with his character. Let me see. Getting on to some of the plot issues here. I'm a little worried as to why exactly Nick Fury thought that that the Amazing Friends, who, as far as we know, have absolutely no training in undercover work, would be suited to work undercover. Now, granted, their cover is paper thin, but still, I don't know. I don't really know if that was the wisest choice on Nick Fury's part. Then again, I guess you could make the case that he was just going for the throw them in the deep end of the pool method of training, but I don't really think that works very well on assignments where subtlety would be required. As talented as they are at beating people up, subtlety is something that the Amazing Friends are surprisingly lacking in. And speaking of subtlety, why is it that only now did Peter ever bother to use the whole ability to turn himself invisible trick that he now has? Wouldn't that have come in handy when Zodiac had taken over the helicarrier? Or any number of situations that have previously arisen on this show? I really hate it when characters have technology or abilities that they just seem to forget about. It's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, wait, here's a situation where this would be really handy, but I don't remember that I can do this. I mean, seriously, it's that sort of thing that basically killed the character of Peter Petrelli on Heroes for me. But I digress. Let me see. Speaking of plot problems, who, in the name of that building that the Wrecking Crew were trying to destroy in the end, the extremely heavy-looking building balanced on 4 tiny little points at the bottom. Okay, I'm not an architect. I just went to a college where they had a bunch of architects because it was the only one in the state of Indiana that offered architecture. But anyway, that has to be one of the most ridiculous buildings I have ever seen. Now, maybe out there somewhere in the world there is actually a building that looks like this. I won't say that this is impossible. I'm not an expert on architecture or engineering or anything like that. But something like that just seems extraordinarily unsafe and impractical. Also, did you notice the only part of the building that's connected to the ground are those 4 points? How do people actually get inside that building? I mean, imagine, if you work in that building, how the heck do you even get through the front door to go to your office in the mornings? But I'm overanalyzing that. But then again, that's why you're here along with me, isn't it? Okay, let me see here. Anything else? Well, I did feel that the little goof that Nick Fury makes at the end, I thought that was a little telegraphed, but I did think that it made for a nice moment. We needed a little bit of humor after all of that. And I do like that they did take the time to genuinely show the Amazing Friends that there are consequences to your actions. However, if you do succeed, and if you do as you're told, as you are being trained to do, then you will be praised for your efforts. So let's wrap this episode up. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good episode. It was fun to watch. There were a lot of nice shout-outs to the Marvel Universe. I mean, even the hardcore Marvel fans out there are probably going to be scratching their heads trying to figure out who Captain Ultra is. I had to go to Wikipedia for that one, I admit. But anyway, this was just basically a fun episode. Good voice acting, good storytelling, and of course, it was done as a tribute to a very talented and very missed creator who did a lot of good for comics and for the fans. So, yeah, good episode here, folks. As always, I just cannot talk. So I'm going to wrap things up here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter @HoosierJedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.